Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Elisha Foon. Coming up.
And the last three presidents since 2008 have pushed for more resources into the Pacific and more engagement.
The US ambassador to New Zealand weighs in on how America's election results could impact the Pacific region. Also, calls for the government to prevent the exploitation of migrant workers in Aotearoa. And a new study looks at the path to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. Is it an achievable goal or a pipe dream? The US ambassador to New Zealand has addressed how the upcoming election could impact the Pacific region. With less than a week before the US elections, America's territories like Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa and Guam, along with the rest of the Pacific region, will be watching how it unfolds. I spoke with US Ambassador Tom Uril in the lead-up to US Election Day on November 5th.
Where I really start is in terms of the United States being a Pacific nation. We have territories in the Pacific. We have a state, the state of Hawaii in the Pacific. And the last three presidents since 2008 have pushed for more resources into the Pacific and more engagement, starting with President Obama in 2008. Since I have been ambassador, I think it's really taken off. We've opened 5 new embassies in the Pacific, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Tonga, and now we're going to have a resident ambassador in Samoa. And we're hoping soon to open a embassy in Kiribati. We have 2 new recognized countries in the Pacific that President Biden made the decision on, Cook's Islands and Niue. We have had 2 historic summits with President Biden in Washington and major Washington officials. And the participation in the Pacific Island Forum as a dialogue partner has been very important to us. And in the time I've been here, we brought the UN ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, from the United Nations in New York down to the Cook Islands for that Pacific Island Summit. So whatever happens in this election, we will maintain a strong presence. We will continue our engagement and our work with like-minded democracies like New Zealand, Samoa, and other democracies in the region. We want to address issues of security, issues of economic development and trade. And because I have learned it's an existential issue in the Pacific Islands, we're going to continue to pursue aggressive climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience.
Those contributions have definitely made a difference and an impact for Pacific leaders. But one of the main concerns that they've raised with us is that there's been a lot of climate resilience funding promised and a lot of funding in general promised, but that hasn't yet been delivered. When can they expect that from the current administration? And will a change in administration lead to the process being halted? Will that make a difference?
My sense is our commitment to climate change with the historic passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had the biggest climate change package in the history of the United States. So, and it was bipartisan. The most important thing to understand is the big historic effort that was taken was bipartisan. Republican members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress working to put that funding forward. As you know, since Paris, big funds have been set up. The Global Climate Change Fund has been created. Many countries across the world have contributed to it. I am pushing for making sure the Pacific Islands can try to access the funding in a way that makes it easier for them. Sometimes they get frustrated with these big funding bureaucracies, and we're trying to work through all that. but I'm hoping that we're going to see quite a bit of engagement, even in the last 4 or 5 months that I'm here, in terms of climate. And I'm traveling to Samoa. I'm traveling to Niue. Um, these are all meetings that I hear a lot about climate change, and we get the input, and then we try to respond and work with these like-minded democracies to push forward on mitigation, adaptation, and resilience.
How would a Trump presidency impact the Pacific?
Well, the first thing I just want to tell you, and I think you know this already. I mean, I don't get involved in terms of commenting on particular presidencies and elections and making assumptions of who's going to win. I work for the people of the United States. I work for the State Department, so we stay out of the politics. But as I said before, um, 3 presidents, starting with President Obama in 2008, have pushed for re-engagement in the Pacific. And while I've been here, it's been pretty dramatic in terms of what has happened. So I don't see anything changing in a big way. I mean, New Zealand and the United States have been partners for such a long time. The friendship is so deep. We've worked together on so many issues. I just think that that relationship is beyond any one individual tampering with. And don't forget, the Congress plays a very important role in all this bipartisan effort. It's just not one person.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to ask about defense and security. How does the US view the Pacific region and the area, considering its strategic location? Guam is in an area where there is a lot of heightened tension. I was there just over a month ago, and I was also at the South Pacific Defense Ministers meeting, and there were US representatives there as well. But at the moment, there's a lot of tension building, and just today we've had some news out as well in regards to a former White House National Security Advisor, John Bolton, saying New Zealand should recognise there's a difference between nuclear weapons and nuclear power, even on naval warships. So he's really advocating for New Zealand to join AUKUS Pillar 1. What's your take on all of that?
For the Pacific region to flourish, each nation must be free to determine its own course within a system of values that ensures opportunity for even the smallest countries or the largest ocean states to thrive and to thrive and prosper, free from the predations of strong and those with maligned intentions. So the United States is present and engaged in the region. We're committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific, and that's a vision that benefits all in that area.
New Zealand's Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner says she's frustrated by a lack of progress being made by the government to prevent the exploitation of migrant workers in Aotearoa. Saunoa Mali'i Karanina Sumeo claims recently announced changes to the Migrant Exploitation Protection Visa reduce support for migrant workers experiencing exploitation while doing nothing to reduce the risk of it happening. She spoke with RNZ Pacific reporter Grace Fiavai about the dangers migrant workers are exposed to.
We're talking about the accredited employment work visa, and we know that there's been lots of media attention that surfaced some of the treatments of people who come here on a temporary basis. Some of these visas, when I say temporary, some are like 3 years or so. So they come to work for us, they've paid recruitment fees, and often they've paid their travel. Some of them paid tens of thousands to come to work for a legitimate job, so it's a real job, and some of them have arrived to find actually there's no job, and then they end up, they borrowed all this money, so they're stuck here and in desperate situations. And we've certainly met with workers who have ended up having to live in really unsafe conditions, overcrowded conditions, or not getting any money and desperate to go home. So what then happens is that they go and pick up jobs that are, I suppose, in the informal sector. When I say informal, I mean often there's no employment contract that they can then use to stand up for themselves, for their rights. And so they become vulnerable to exploitation. So some of them work for weeks, if not months, without pay. So this exploitation is happening in New Zealand, and government has recognized, and I'm thankful the government has recognized that we need to do something that will stop this treatment of people who come to serve the needs of New Zealand. And so it's great to see some recognition from the new government in terms of what they're trying to do. But I don't think it's enough. I think what I'm waiting to hear is how are they holding employers to account for the exploitation that is happening to these people who come in service of us. And some of our people, when we talk about the RSE scheme, the seasonal labor scheme, that's what's more familiar to our Tangata Pacifica. A lot of the time our workers are being treated well, they are being paid properly, but we've also uncovered through our inquiries, there's also forced labor that's happened, or people not being paid properly, or deductions coming out of their pay that they haven't even consented to. These are things that are not legal. You can't treat a normal New Zealander like that. Why is it that people feel that they can treat Pacific people or people who've come from other countries, especially parts of Asia, in service of us? So these are against the law and against people's fundamental human rights. So we are calling on the government. We want to hear more about what are you going to do to hold businesses to account for the violations of the rights of people, be they from the Pacific or anywhere else in the world.
And so what do you think, what does it look like to you in terms of them holding these businesses to account? What do they need to do then?
What we'd like to see from government is how are they holding, we're talking about people traveling across borders. It's a transnational chain of events that enables exploitation. What checks are being done at the host nation, if it's Samoa or Tonga or Papua New Guinea? What checks are being done by public officials to make sure that people are recruited properly, that they're not being charged insane fees, and and they're not signing up contracts that they don't understand? So we need to do some work across the borders, and also we need to make sure that when people land here, that we have enough labor inspectors that go and survey and do checks on these businesses. Number one, to check that they are genuine operations, that people are being treated properly, that the accommodation that people are living in is humane accommodation, and that that their pay is actually being paid what they've agreed to be paid, and also that the deductions aren't to the extent where some people don't end up with negative $200 or $300 in their pocket, owing debt to the next pay. So there are a lot of things that need to happen. And also, if something goes wrong, how quickly can we get help to the workers who are being exploited? And how easily can we make the system so they're not afraid to call for help? Because some of them are afraid to call for help in case they're not selected for the next round of the RSE pool and so forth. So how can we stop those threats to people so that they can speak up when they're getting exploited? And how do we hold businesses to account more easily? Because it costs a lot of money to go through court, for people to make a complaint. Not many people can afford lawyers when they're only here on a temporary basis. So how can we provide genuine support for workers who come in service of us and hold people in power who are the businesses to account more easily and stamp out these violations of rights and the indignity that workers end up experiencing?
A new study has found hundreds of marine protected areas need to be established in order to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. 85 marine protected areas need to be made daily from the beginning of next year in order to reach the UN's goal set in 2022. Caleb Fotheringham asked lead author of the study, Kristen Reckberger, if the goal is achievable or just a pipe dream.
I don't think so at all. I think that, there's the high seas, which is not part of the study. We're looking at national waters here. And even though the 30 by 30 target is a global target and includes all parts of the ocean, this was to do an exercise on what if national waters protected 30%. And so we know from experience of our own of helping create offshore marine reserves that they are possible and they can be very effective, and you can track them by satellite like Global Fishing Watch. And so National Geographic Pristine Seas has helped create 28 of the largest marine reserves, no take, in the world. And so the offshore ones are definitely possible, and we need 300 more. And when you look at the sizes of that have currently exist and need to expand, And then for coastal community reserves, there are also some leading examples of that around the world. And you can find those on MPA Atlas or Protected Seas. And so some of those are more effective than others. And so, for example, there is bottom trawling in many coastal MPAs, for example, in the UK or Europe. So it's not that it's not possible, it's that the ones that exist could be far more effective. And the ones that exist prove that it's possible because we have nearshore and community reserves all over the world.
The study also said about the 190,000 small MPAs, which just seems like a colossal number.
It is a colossal number. It is overwhelming. And at the same time, again, we know how to do it. And what we thought about are what are the barriers to getting there and how can we really make MPAs go viral, really? And so we came up with the three big barriers, it seems, are people really just don't know. And so inspiring media and content and education is really important. National governments often don't allow for community-based marine reserves. So I'm here, in Spain, and if you're the mayor of Barcelona, for example, you actually can't create a community marine reserve without going through lots of levels of bureaucracy. So we know that if we could reform that policy and have nations enable community-based marine reserves, it could go a lot faster. And then the third part is, so far it's been quite linear, and as public goods, a lot of marine reserves are created and managed by government and then supported by philanthropy. But the third piece of the puzzle, once people are inspired and enabled, is how do they do it? And new financing, including marine reserves as kind of concessions. You can get a concession for a fish farm, for example, quite easily, but why doesn't nature have a concession? So if we have marine reserves boosting both fishing and tourism in a geography, that's another example of like a different way of thinking, and having private businesses think about marine reserves as long-term investments instead of governments thinking of them as another line on the budget that's expensive.
So businesses participating in marine reserves, would that be like protecting the area? It looks nice, so you can get tourists in and use that as some sort of business model. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, basically, we know that when a place is protected, people want to come see it. And so there's dive tourism inside a reserve, and then the spillover of the fish replenishes the fisheries outside. So you can create a model that allows for both tourism and fishing to benefit in a geography. And so if those stakeholders, or if this, in this case, even cooperative shareholders got together and figured out the timing of that replenishment, both would hugely benefit. And there's bridge financing like philanthropy available for the conservation and business planning for both. So that's one example of how the model could work.
Is there a concern that governments and whoever else is setting up these marine protected areas, that they could set them up but not really be as ambitious as they could be? And I suppose an example of that would be not having them completely no take and allowing some sort of fishing to happen, or some other activity that will be not beneficial to the environment. Could that happen? And governments and other people setting this up, they could almost fudge, reaching this target.
Yeah, for sure. I think given the time, we're trying to quadruple ocean protection in the next 6 years, because the ocean's currently under only about 8% of some form of protection. So there is a worry that there would just be more paper parks and announcements just to get to the 30%, which would be really bad. We obviously would want effective marine spatial planning and the right size of park and the right design of park. And as far as people fishing, I mean, we know that in as little as 2 years, a no-take marine reserve can replenish the fisheries around it. So it's a pretty short, an amazing return on investment in a short amount of time. But also there are places where OECMs are important, and we work with some smallholder marine reserves where there's a lot of smallholder fishing, but then they also know that a no-take area within that would be help replenish the fisheries. So it needs to be well balanced and have the right replenishment of no take, but it's not to displace people in any way. It's to really help people and have fish forever.
Do you think we will get there to 30% by 2030?
I think we will make a lot of progress. I think some countries will make more than others, and some have already done it. And I think that there are those that have a ways to go can learn from the leaders. And I think one of the things that we want this study to do is really raise ambition, not intimidate people, but really have us understand the scale of the issue and have groups learning as much as possible from each other so that we can unleash a movement and almost a revolution so that we can get there as close to that as we possibly can.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.